So we were just talking about the systemic rivalry between the United States
Right,
and China, and
right.
we're discussing the possibility of global power competition and how. What is your take on the likelihood of a second? So basically, Cold War 2.0.
Right. Yeah, I lost status, but I'm still here.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. Um, I had moved on to um, the cost of actual direct conflict. That is to say, yes, we would continue to try to um, avoid being hostage to supply chains that keep us restrained by China, uh, but but the base the real that would not be a problem. We will just find new ways to source everything we do. But the real question is whether there could be military conflict between the U.S. and China at some point. Did I get into that, or does that where I drifted off?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this is, in fact, what interests me most is that it's not just a matter whether China is projected to become global economic power number one. But what interests me more is the disruptive potential of global power such as China. What might be, in your view, the worst case scenario for the global affairs in case that there is a systemic coordination of disruptive power between Moscow and Beijing? That's the one question I have. And the second is, so basically it's sufficient for China even to remain active as global power number two. There is enough disruptive potential, in my view, being delivered that way to the global system. And then again, in connection to it, what is, in your view, the best strategy for the United States? Will Washington rely on the traditional allies? And you've outlined already some of these fluid reconfigurations. Or will it be looking for new partners, for new allies? Will it be an institutionalized cooperation, or rather just, highly political one without the necessity to create institutions or new institutions? And just to give you one example, there have been calls for Asian NATO, whereas in my view, it's unrealistic. I don't see, for instance, an Asian NATO emerging, out of the current situation. So I think that it's going to be much more ad hoc reconfiguration, coordinated in a highly ranking political manner, but not institutionalized. So what is your take on that?
Yeah. Well, the first thing is there will be continuing apprehension and fear of a possible physical confrontation, that is, the military uh, conflict with live firepower of some kind. I think that's the least likely alternative for either the US or China because it's so costly. It is really, really costly to have an engagement that involves firing of weapons. The Iraq invasion by the US was far more costly than anybody dreamed when the Bush administration went ahead with it. I mean, they estimated 50 billion, and it was probably ultimately in the trillions. It, China knows that. We know that. So open firepower confrontation not so likely. Um, the ability of China to disrupt or impede or manipulate the U.S. Uh, communication system, power grid, um, machinery for managing our water supplies. Yeah, it's great, but our power to do the same to China is also great. So we have a kind of um, mutually assured destruction scenario like the old days of the Cold War and nuclear missiles in Russia and the U.S. It, China can experiment, and it recently did when the Russians exploited the solar winds hacking episode. China tried to hitch a ride, but then the Chinese didn't pursue it. I think our ability to reach into China's system is great. So neither China nor the U.S. really wants to do systemic damage to each other through non-military means. So we're kind of at a stalemate situation. Um, this applies, by the way, to whether China really wants a conflict that is addressed to Taiwan, because the cost to China in resources and money would be so large that it would make a major dent in China's growth at home. So um, um, we are going to harass each other, and China is going to try desperately to keep a niche in everything that develops in the West, and that's why they so much want to be a part of the German communication system, because if they are there, they can tap into all of the U.S. information system through the German system. Um, so that's an ongoing problem. It will involve a lot of investment in, those in cybersecurity. That's going to be the big challenge, and somehow dealing with misinformation, um, or malinformation, whatever you want to call it, manipulation. Um, but if the Chinese decided to disrupt Wall Street, we can probably do incredible damage to the entire financial structure of China's relations with the world. Neither of us wants to go that direction. So, ongoing rivalry, and at the base, at the core of the rivalry, is China's drive in artificial intelligence to be able to use that capability better than the U.S. And that at the core of that question is how much information can you gather? If the party that wins is the one with the most information. You have to out Amazon. You have to outdo NSA, Five Eyes. Um, China will try to do that, but um, I just have some doubt anybody can hold a lead for more than a few seconds before it erodes by some other innovation.
Mm-hmm. So your anticipation is that China, for instance, won't attack Taiwan because of cost-benefit analysis. I mean, if we apply the cost-benefit analysis, then we would have anticipated that Russia would have never annexed Crimea because of the unprecedented isolation, economic, diplomatic, financial, that Moscow witnessed following the events in 2014. And let me remind you that the Russian currency was at the bottom in traded currency. So basically, Russia was facing a default-like situation if it were not for China to step in and help and provide liquidity for Russia and help basically,
Sure.
so basically prevent Russia from from defaulting, just like in the 90s, 97.
Right. Sure.
So do you think that cost-benefit analysis would really apply to the rationale of Chinese or Russian decision makers? I mean, in the case of China, wouldn't it be a perfect, let's say, reason also to solidify and facilitate the domestic support for Xi Jinping and his circles of power?
Look, annexation of Crimea was a calculation by Putin and his people that the U.S. simply wouldn't respond, and it was correct. We would have had to respond. Not We would have had to show a response within hours. It reminded me of when the Berlin Wall went up in the Cold War. The U.S. got intelligence the wall was going up, but I forget, it was Christmas holidays. Everybody said, well, we'll deal with it Monday. Um, yeah, I think Washington was caught flat-footed and just didn't know what to do. And by the time they got around to understanding it, it was too late. I don't think you can take Taiwan in quite that way. Um, there will be a calculation by Xi Jinping. Will a U.S. president really defend Taiwan? Yes or no? But present policy in the U.S. under Trump and now under Biden is to make it far more expensive to engage with Taiwan, um, equip Taiwan better so that the cost of overcoming Taiwan's resistance would be much larger. Now, this is a technical issue, but I've been over this over the years, ever since my days in the Pentagon. Whatever defense system you build, it costs roughly 6 to 7 times that amount to penetrate it. So increasing the defense multiplies the cost to China to try to overcome it. It's not just a dollar for dollar exchange. We're making it formidably expensive. And I don't think China internally can handle a shift of resources abruptly to deal with a large scale conflict. But I cannot predict what any U.S. president will do. Lately, I can't predict anything about the president because each president is really, since Bill Clinton, and certainly throughout the Obama years, we have slow response, um, preoccupation with U.S. domestic issues, a kind of sleepiness. So it may be that China will calculate. We just won't react or not react in time, and it'll all be done in a short interim. So that's what I'm saying. I don't think it's likely, but I cannot tell you what the Chinese will think of any future leader we have and whether our leaders are interested in the world or not.
Mm-hmm. Now, given that there is a transformation of Industry 4.0, one of the major domains is space exploration.
Yes.
Um, China and Russia have announced that they are going to build space station on the moon. Do you think that it might come to a situation or to a scenario where there will be a break in the internet? So basically, there will be a kind of a split in the international community when it comes to the International Space Station. So basically, once again, I have to outline this Cold War 2.0 scenario where at some point Russia and China will have their own space station. and United States will have to take care of the International Space Station with allies, with the help of third countries. So basically, there is going to be a split of of these three between these three powers in terms of the way how they explore the space or explore the moon or go to third planets and so on and so forth. Do you see a competition in space, or do you think that global affairs will be basically once again witnessing a kind of a bipolarization in this matter?
Um, it's likely it's likely that we will have a period of competition, just as we did with Russia when Russia first became excited about exploring um, travel beyond the Earth, um, and it's very expensive competition. But does it make shape history? I don't. I'm somewhat doubtful. Um, I mean, we can spend a lot of money on it and it gets a lot of press and TV coverage, but does it change history? Um, I, it's I don't know how much of China's resources will be devoted to. Yes, they will try to put a man on the moon and have a space station of their own. But beyond that, um, in terms of the region between um, orbital satellites and Earth, the U.S. has a huge capability. It was said only 2 or 3 years ago that the Chinese could take out some of our satellites and disable our Navy. And I spoke with the relevant people on this in the military and in the Defense Department. They said, well, actually not, because for every satellite they take out, we can put 1,000 small ones at a lower orbit and have even more coverage than now. It's just a flick of the switch. Um, so yeah, we can all spend money on that, but I'm not yet convinced that space competition is going to be certainly not in my lifetime, but and you're much younger, but in your lifetime either.
Mm-hmm. Even though that if we look, for instance, at India's case, India has managed to launch its so basically its space program with quite limited funds and resources, and was successful, with it. So probably in the future, it's going to be also about once again about a prestige to be among the space powers. The very fact that now several powers have launched their space forces, and they also consider space as part of their industry portfolios. I think there is obvious trend that this is going to play a major role, but once again, like you said, we are not sure yet where this journey leads to. Now, another question I have for you is, what is your anticipation for the global economy? How will all these transformations in the global industry will affect the global economy? What kind of recovery we will witness following the COVID-19 pandemic? And once again, you are one of those analysts who correctly outlined that global economy and the global trade were in a state of stagnation already prior to COVID-19. Do you think that now, with the acceleration of all these transformational processes, this will have a positive or rather negative effect? And what do you think about the so-called Great Depression 2.0 scenarios?
Wonderful questions. Um, um, Let me separate 5 or 10 years from now from now through say 2025. Um, if you ask me 10 years out, I think we're going to have a global boom. No doubt in my mind that all this new technology and the enabling of people in more and more countries and the improvement in regional transportation and the continuous development of internet learning, um, it's going to be lead to a period of prosperity. But if you ask me right now, are we going to have a V-shaped recovery anywhere in the world? My answer is no. Um, First of all, the U.S. alone, we lost um, about 20 million jobs, and we can't replace those. In what Janet Yellen, our Treasury Secretary, said we'll be back to normal in a year. Well, we might be back to normal in 5 years, but not in a year. Um, the um, Society has been adjusting. There are a lot of people who work from home who don't want to go back to work in an office, who just have decided, I like the flexibility of hours and the ability to rearrange my weekly schedule, take time off when I want, work when I want, work in the middle of the night when nobody else wants to work. Um, I, I think that's now embedded. Um, Businesses will have to adapt, and the most capable people. I remember back when investment banking about 20 years ago began to be transformed into really global investment banking. And the best investment bankers said, I don't want to live in the city of London or in Manhattan. I'm going to live in Boulder or in some ski resort. And we'll book the business in London, but we'll do the business somewhere else. Um, I think we're going to go through the same process, but not only in finance, but in everything. I'll work for you, I'll give you my brain power, but I'm not coming to Armonk to IBM headquarters. Um, so that will take time to adjust. And it means rearrangement of many things. I mean, if you don't have to keep all these office buildings full, what do you do with them? I mean, you have to sell them off at a loss, um, but but you have to begin to pick up the operating costs of people distributed in faraway places because they'll insist. Um, the the recovery of Europe will be harder than the U.S. The U.S. has an advantage that people are used to moving, and we are now having a huge amount of mobile shifting of population, partly driven by the problems of high taxes and deficient budgets in places like Illinois, New York, California. So the new growth nodes in the U.S. are particularly Texas and Florida. Um, Mobility is normal in the U.S. Europe is not normal, and I see slow decay in Germany, little less slow decay in France, but decay in European political management, decay in the EU integration process, breakdown in the financial structure of the euro. Um, all of that is in play. China, I don't see China in a fast recovery. Yes, China's industrial output is much bigger now, and probably they are growing at 6 to 8% annual rate for output. But the demand in China is not growing. It's maybe growing at 1 to 2%, and that's it. And the
Mhm.
only way they can overcome this is they have to shift more of the economy to the state. They have to centralize more of the economy. But that will be, to me, the end of the road for China. It will not bear the weight of over centralization. I've watched the collapse of the Soviet Union, and I just think total centralization cannot function. It will break down. So I'm not a, a believer that China will keep going at the same pace or that it will pass the U.S. But we have a period of transition that we have to go through, rearranging where the jobs are, and how we provide for these jobs, how we provide for public services, huge budget costs, and we have political confusion. Everybody's wondering what Biden will do next. I was asked earlier before this interview, um, will new tax legislation pass? I said no, it will not pass Congress, whatever is in it. What about infrastructure? I said no, there will not be any agreement on infrastructure. Um, could there be agreement on anything? No. We have a confused new administration. We have a split in the Congress that is not going to change. We have an election coming up next year in the Congress that will paralyze decision making. We're essentially paralyzed. So will we have lots more stimulus? I don't think so. So we're going to be struggling. Now, if you look at what the Federal Reserve staff have concocted as their forecast, they don't believe we have strong growth in the final quarter of this year. They believe we're back to low growth. I think they're right. I think they look at a lot of the numbers and that's what they see. So, yeah, the U.S. is in a better position because we have mobility, resiliency, but the world economy is not going to bounce back. I don't see any huge sustainable boom. I just see a short term lift followed by disappointment. But 5 years out, I see huge opportunities unfolding as all this new technology becomes available to more people around the world in more locations.
And a final question I have that is derived from your last statement is linked to the societal effects. What is your anticipation about the new effects of these breakthrough technologies? I mean, we've already observing that authoritarian governments are seizing the opportunity, thanks to the digitalization, to introduce new ways of surveillance. So do you think that this will have effect on the global system, that we are going to slide into a more authoritarian style of global governance because of the new tools and the new ways how to basically control societies? Or will democracies bounce back the way they did during the Cold War? There is already something called an alliance of democracies, and there is indeed now a strong effort on the side of Washington, in coordinated actions together with partners and allies to counter this kind of, specifically this kind of digital surveillance techniques that we've seen in countries such as China or Russia. What is your take on that? In which direction do you see the trend going?
This is a really hard question. Let me begin with the movement, the likely movement of central banks, including the Federal Reserve, Bank of England, European Central Bank, and other central banks. The likely movement is towards central bank digital currency. And if I'm right, then most governments and central banks will want to ban everything else, anything that's competing influence, Bitcoin or whatever. And that sounds technical, but what it means is somebody or some body, some agency would have access to everybody's money. They would know whether you spent too much money on water in California in the last few months, or whether you watched too much porn by some social standard, or whether you are a bad driver and you're getting tickets all the time. Because there would everything would be recorded, and that would give power to people who are seeking to assert power to interfere and manipulate with everybody in their personal life. So I'm very worried about the casual drift into digital currency directed by the states because of the yearning to get rid of um, illicit businesses, drugs, and get rid of tax evasion. That they will put us all in a trap. Um, and then in parallel, I worry about voters and politicians. Politicians used to be mindful of wider interests. If you were in Congress, you paid attention to what the unions were interested in and what the governors and the mayors were doing. You had a wide span because your thinking was that voters anywhere could affect your own future. But now almost everybody in politics is thinking about how much money they can raise and who would be the source of the money. And that leads to concentration of influence. And someone who wants to be an authoritarian can understand that and will try to exploit it. I think Trump, without necessarily thinking deeply about it, really wanted an authoritarian position in our society and tried to get it. Um, I think people around any new president, including Biden, they're surrounded by lawyers who say, well, if we can't get it through the Congress, let's do it by executive order. Let's bypass. Voters are being marginalized, and money especially is becoming central. Who has it? Who will use it for you or against you? So we are in a very bad moment in history. And our constitutional system in the U.S. is strong, but it's going to be tested um, quite a bit. And so I don't know how it comes out. But authoritarianism is probably somewhat on the rise in Europe. It's obviously a big factor in China. Um, it's it's a very worrisome moment in history. But we have had moments in history when authoritarianism did dominate and then were pushed aside. So I don't know, it's beyond my lifetime that all of this will play out. But me, I learned I was deeply involved in the U.S. constitutional process, not only in the executive branch but in the Senate, and I had personally interactions with the full range of influences, and um, and so I learned a lot. I was a big fan of the separation of powers. Lately, the separation of powers in the U.S. are being tested. I don't know where it comes up. So, are we going to be under more authoritarian leadership? Maybe. Is it going to be easier for authoritarians to take power? Yes. Can there be pushback? I'm not sure, because a lot of people are become interested in themselves and not much in the rest of the world. Um, the younger generations in the time that I came to Washington thought public service was a great thing to do, at least for part of your life. Now, I think everybody who's young just wants to make money the easy way, or if they have to go to work for Morgan Stanley or Goldman Sachs.
Mhm. Well, I think this was a very, very good way how to end our conversation, and I'm really grateful that I could join you on this journey in exploring the current trends when it comes to the main socioeconomic systems, and when it comes to the global system transformation. And I would like to point once again to the Malmgren Strategic Institute. To that's an information for our viewers and for our listeners if they want to check out the Strategic Institute of Harold Malmgren. That's called Malmgren Strategic Institute. And I also would like to recommend you to read The Coming Global Industrial Transformation. This is a recent publication by Malmgren Strategic Institute that you can also find on internet. And Harold is also very active on Twitter, so you can also find him on Twitter and engage with him, ask further questions, because of course in such a limited time we could not explore all relevant questions of our time. However, I reserve myself the invitation to another digital discussion where we can also assess the ongoing events and developments in global affairs. If you allow me, dear Harold.
Of course. Anytime you wish, Melina.
Well, thank you very much for being with me in the last 90 minutes. And like I said, stay tuned. We are going to continue this conversation. Thank you, dear Harold.
You have a nice day.
You too. Thank you.
Bye.